Welcome to another episode of Divorce Tips. Today we're talking about child custody evaluations. What is it? When are they needed? And who conducts them? I know child custody evaluations are called something different in probably every state. So this is going to be some kind of thing that the court maybe orders or parties do in a divorce or in a custody action to determine custody or parent time or how things are going to work after the divorce. So whatever state you're in, whatever it's called, that's kind of what we're talking about. In Utah, they're called child custody evaluations, and they're actually in Utah, they are specific to an actual rule. We have a statute that guides them. It's called 4-903, and it says specifically what the child custody evaluator is supposed to do, who's qualified to be considered a child custody evaluator, and then what elements do they have to follow, and then what they need to do to give advice to the court regarding recommendations. So let me just help you understand a little bit. You would want to do a child custody evaluation in very high conflict divorces where you and your spouse cannot come to an agreement about what is best for custody and parent time of your children. You would also want to do a child custody evaluation if there's been a lot of abuse, if there is a spouse that possibly has some kind of high conflict personality, if there are problems with your children. These child custody evaluation could be very, very good for you because they are very, very specific and they tailor the recommendations to whatever issues you're having within your specific case. So they could be very, very good for you. Now, what happens in Utah is when a custody evaluation needs to go forward, either the court, you can motion to the court and say, hey, I want to do this. This is how we're going to pay for it. And the court can order it. You and your spouse can agree to do one and then, agree to costs. Hey, split the costs. Either way, if you want a custody evaluation and you can show the court that there are good reasons for it, a lot of times the court's going to let it go forward. In Utah, a child custody evaluator is usually a social worker, a therapist of some kind, a psychologist, sometimes a licensed psychologist. And what they are, they're trained to literally evaluate you, evaluate your spouse. A lot of times they do mental health evaluations. They rate you on the MMPI. They do stuff like that to see, if there's any concerns regarding these behaviors within these tests, these psychological tests. They then evaluate your children. They talk to your children. They want to know, hey, what's going on? What do you want? What do you, how do you feel about the situation? They then also a lot of times evaluate you with your children. They want to see, the comfortability that your children have with you. They want to see how you communicate with them, et cetera, et cetera. They want to be able to kind of, get a full picture. Good custody evaluators will then take a lot of collateral evidence. So they'll take they'll take all the court pleadings. They'll talk to tons of witnesses. They'll talk to teachers. They'll talk to doctors. They'll talk and review a ton of collateral evidence to basically then deduce what they would call their recommendations. And at the end, especially in Utah, they have best interest factors that they're going to follow, and they're going to go through each factor, and they're going to do an analysis based off of all of their information to determine, what evidence fits within that factor. For example, one of the factors is what parent is most likely willing to facilitate a relationship with the other parent. And so they'll kind of look at all the evidence and then they'll make a decision to say, parent A is really good at that or parent B is really good at that. And they'll talk about that. The best interest factors will then deduce them to their recommendation, how they see a parenting plan working, how they see how they see a parent time schedule going, and then they can make suggestions on what they think is best for the children. By doing that, they then can come to court and be an expert witness to tell the court their recommendations and their opinions to why they got to their recommendations. The courts find this very, very helpful. And the reason why is because the courts, first of all, don't have the time to do all the work that an evaluator does. Second of all, the courts are not experienced evaluators. They're judges, they're lawyers, they're people that have been taught to critically think and analyze things, but they have not been trained in talking to children. They have not been trained in the art of, psychological testing. And so they're not going to be able to do all of that stuff. So a custody evaluator coming to court and then telling the court that analyses is really, really helpful for the court. However, with that said, I have been to court with a custody evaluator who has said one thing, maybe in favor of my client, maybe against my client. And with all the evidence that was heard in court, the court doesn't necessarily follow the recommendations of the evaluator. So you do have some risk right there. They're not arbitrators. They're not, the court doesn't have to follow their recommendations, and the court can make findings to why they don't. And so you have to be careful about that. The other thing you have to know about a custody evaluation, they cost money. Maybe some states give these kind of evaluations with some kind of court-funded money. I'm going to guess most states don't. And in Utah specifically, they do not give it at all. You have to pay 100% of that fee. And even now, the courts require you to prove that you have that money now to pay that. Because what's happened is custody evaluations get, granted, and they take years to complete because the parties aren't paying their monies. And so the court's not allowing that anymore. It's either if you want it, you show me where the money is, you show me, and you have to pay it within whatever the time frame that the court gives. So you really have to be careful of that. In Utah, these custody evaluations can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. They're really, really expensive. And in some of the most dire circumstances, you have to do an update. And so they can cost a lot of money. And then you have to pay for the evaluator to do a report and have to come to court. So you have to kind of look at that. However, in some of the worst cases, they can be some of the best things that you've done because they come to court and they're on your side. They give the evidence that you've been screaming all along, but yet the court's going to kind of take you with a grain of salt because you're the angry ex or whatnot. And the evaluator can kind of validate some of that information. And then the court says, you're right. And you can then prove to the court why your case should be won or your custody and evaluate your parent time schedule should be the way it should be. Child custody evaluations should not happen in every case. In fact, they should be the minority, not the majority. And so you really want to talk to your attorney or you really want to evaluate your situation to decide if an evaluation is worth it and you need it in your case. Thanks. Till next time. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, follow, and share. I'd love to hear your questions and feedback. You can contact me at community@jillcoil.com. See you next time. I am an attorney, but I am not your attorney. Any advice given on the podcast is general and shall not be construed as legal advice.